Can I propose Councillor Pillinger?
Seconded.
Thank you. I'll hand over to Councillor Pillinger.
Thank you very much. Welcome to this special meeting of the Joint Community and External Scrutiny Committee and the Corporate and Performance Scrutiny Committee, considering local government reorganisation. I'm Councillor Pete Pillinger, Chair of the Corporate Performance and Budget Scrutiny Committee. Matt Campbell, Chair of Community and External Scrutiny Committee, is on my left. I will ask members to introduce themselves, but I will start with my left.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Vice Chair of this committee. I'm also ward member for Walterley West.
Councillor David Howarth, member for Harricombe Priory in Penwitham.
Good evening, Michael Green, Councillor for Moss Side Ward and Vice Chairman of one of the scrutiny committees.
Good evening, Councillor Leslie Pritchard, Vice Chair of the Community and External Scrutiny Committee and Ward Member for Lostock Hall.
I'm Councillor Will King and I'm the member for Longton and Hutton West.
Evening, I'm Councillor Keith Martin. I currently sit on the Community and External Committee. Thank you.
Could our guests introduce yourselves as we go round?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor James Flannery, lead member for Devolution Local Government Reorganisation.
And good evening, everybody. I'm Councillor Matthew Tomlinson. I'm the leader of the council.
Good evening. I'm Chris Sinnott. I'm the Chief Executive.
Thank you. Chris Lomax, Wantley Dale, East, substituting for Lou Jackson.
David Bollenberg, Bamber Bridge West, and I'm a member of the Corporate Performance and Budget Scrutiny Committee.
I'm Deborah Ashton. I'm the councillor for Charlotte Ward in Penwitham, and I'm a member of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Karen Walton. I represent Farrington West and I'm substituting tonight.
Good evening, Councillor Hayden Williams for Leyland Central, and I'm a member of the Community and External Scrutiny Committee.
Ben Story, Democratic Services Officer.
And Darren Cranshaw, Head of Democratic Services.
And I think we should be being joined by Councillor Jane Bell online. I don't know whether she's online at the moment.
Councillor Lillis.
Yes, I'm
Sorry?
here.
Councillor Lillis is as well.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. And we have councillors who are not on the scrutiny committees here with us as well, one of whom I think is online. The meeting is being live screened via YouTube and will be available on the council's website. Some housekeeping for those of us in the Civic Centre. No fire drills are planned, and if the alarm goes off, please leave by the emergency exit at either side of the dais and congregate in the car park. Please turn mobile phones off and switch your microphones off when not speaking. For those joining by Microsoft Teams, please remain muted and indicate at the appropriate time when you would like to speak, and I will bring you in. I don't quite know how we're managing that. Is somebody...
Yes, we're monitoring it.
You're monitoring it, yeah. So let us move on to the agenda. We have apologies for absence from Councillor Lou Jackson. Are there any other apologies for absence?
Chair, we do have apologies from Councillor Jane Bell, who is joining online, and also Councillor Lillis, who again is joining online.
Right. Yeah, Joan Burrows. Any declarations of interest?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to declare personal interest as an employee of Lancashire County Council. Thank you.
And Councillor Martin.
Likewise, Chair, but I'm not in a position of management and control.
Thank you. This is a unique piece of business in the life of this council in its lifetime. and we are going to offer the Leader of the Council, the Chief Exec, 15 to 20 minutes to introduce the item for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. We've had a chat about this. We're going to let the Chief Executive do the submission on the proposal itself. And then when it comes to questions, if there's any technical questions, I'll defer to the Chief Exec or to Holly, who's over, sat hiding her face in the corner. But if it's a political question, obviously myself or Councillor Flannery will answer those. But in the meantime, I'm happy to hand over to the Chief Exec, who says that he's going to have to speak quickly now that you've said he's only got 20 minutes.
And unfortunately, I'm desperately clicking because my computer just kicked me out. I don't know which meeting to join, I'm afraid, Dan. So a presentation will come up on the screen. If people are comfortable, I will stay seated so I don't tower over the top of the leader. The process of local government reorganisation, as has already been said, is unique and it is particularly complex. You will appreciate that, and apologies in advance to members of the committee. We do appreciate that you've been given a very long document and not very long to be able to consider it. We did recognise that was going to happen and had conversations with the chairs in advance. Because of those difficulties, we have been developing a proposal with 5 other councils across Lancashire, which inherently brings some complexity into something that was already pretty complex. I'll start by giving a very broad and brief overview of the timeline that is in place with local government reorganisation. The government published a white paper called the English Evolution White Paper last year around December time, and it had 2 focuses to it. The first was around devolution, and largely a direction of travel towards directly elected mayors, which has been something that's been fairly well rehearsed across Lancashire. And then secondly, it also introduced a proposal that the government views that areas with 2-tier local government, sometimes seen as 3-tier to include parish and town councils, but areas of the country that have both county councils and district councils in England should cease to function in that way, and we should move to a unitary form of local government. Unitary form of local government, most locally seen in places like Bolton, Wigan, other parts of Greater Manchester or Liverpool City region. Lancashire is the last place in the north of England that has a county council and district councils. Having said that it was going to do this, it issued a statutory invitation in February, which was a letter to all 15 councils in Lancashire, the 12 districts, the county council, Blackburn with Darwen and Blackpool Council, to ask for proposals for how local government could be shaped. And it set a deadline of a few weeks' time, so the 28th of November, and that's where we're at the moment. Once those proposals are received, the government intends on undertaking a statutory consultation process, which will run broadly from the beginning of 2026, probably until around about May time, and then we anticipate at the moment that ministerial decision will be made in July, so they will tell us what their chosen option is at that point, with the aim of then moving towards new councils having their vesting day, their first day of full existence on the 1st of April 2028. It's fairly well rehearsed, and I think members will recognise some of these from past briefings and in social media and the press, that Lancashire does not have a single option being put forward. There are at the moment 5 options that are being proposed. Very broadly, that's a 2 model split along the M65 Ribble broadly, supported by the County Council. A 3 model that from a South Ribble perspective puts South Ribble with Preston, Chorley and West Lancashire, and that's supported by 5 out of the 15 councils. A 4 unitary option, which we'll talk about in more detail because that was identified as the preferred option for South Ribble if LGR were to happen, and that's supported by 6 out of the 15 councils. And purposes of South Ribble, that puts us with Chorley and West Lancs. A 5 model, which is the same from our perspective, but splits East Lancashire in two broadly. And then an alternative 4 model, which again is the same for us, put forward by Blackpool Council, which is a little more complex because it takes the Fleetwood element of Wyre and puts that with Blackpool and Fylde. It takes the area to the south of the A59 in Ribble Valley and it puts that with East Lancashire, and then the remaining element of Ribble Valley, Lancaster and the remaining part of Wyre form the 4th unitary. So they're the 5 options that are being put forward. We've then spent some time developing the business case, the proposal that has been circulated to members of the committee at the end of last week and then made public this morning. It is a long document. It is based broadly upon the government's Green Book template for business cases. So it has a strategic case, an economic and financial case, and then the commercial and management case. Very broadly, the words, the arguments, the context, the numbers, and then the plan for how you would implement your proposals. And that is the format that is followed by the proposal that we will now talk about in more detail through this meeting. As I've said, South Ribble has identified that if LGR were to go ahead, that its preferred option would be a 4 Lancashire. And so the next part of the presentation follows what that proposal sets out. And it does do it at a high level, but hopefully gives members an overview of the proposals being made. We start the proposal by setting what is our vision for local government reorganisation. And the argument that's been put forward by the 6 councils that are supporting 4 Lancashire is that this is an opportunity for change. It's an opportunity to recognise that local government and wider public services aren't necessarily organised in the most efficient manner. They're not necessarily focused always on the right thing. And so a significant change in structures provides that opportunity to better focus on prevention, early intervention, to better focus on economic growth. And very broadly, that's what our vision sets out to then create. The proposal then sets out objectives, and those objectives are to make sure that a Lancashire Mayoral Strategic Authority can work effectively. And through working effectively, that Lancashire will be far better placed to play its role in the north of England's growth. Our argument very broadly is that having 4 unitary councils in the configuration that is suggested will mean that actually Lancashire is able to work well together through a mayoral strategic authority, particularly around areas of economic growth. So there is a vehicle for us to work collectively on our own economic growth, but that those 4 unitary councils will also be able to work with the neighbouring regions of Liverpool, Greater Manchester, West Yorkshire, North Yorkshire and Cumbria, because those unitary councils will be of a scale to be able to work outside of those areas, but also will have a self-interest in driving those economic ties between the sub-region and wider. We then have objectives around making sure that we get the balance right. So we create councils that are big enough to be financially sustainable, but small enough to be able to be flexible and to understand local areas so that we can better focus our services on prevention and early intervention. And then finally, we also want to make sure that we set up councils which are democratically accountable, so they are not too big. They can understand those local areas and they can be recognised and understood and make sense to the communities that they serve. Those objectives will be important in a minute because we use that to be able to assess the proposals being made once we've done an initial assessment. I'm going to click my microphone off rather than click onto the next slide. We then assess all 5 options that are being put forward. We assess them against the government's criteria. The government's criteria very broadly are that you should make sure that it covers the whole area. So you're not allowed to make proposals that just cover South Ribble. You have to cover the whole of the 15 councils within Lancashire. It needs to make sense from an economic and community point of view, and also have a geography that is coherent. So you can't put an area that doesn't adjoin the next door with another place. So you can't, for example, put Fylde with Hyndburn and hope there's some sort of bridge or tunnel created for that. The government also set an expectation that they should be of a sufficient scale, and within the criteria they set 500,000 as the benchmark population. Further clarification has been given since they set that actually the government don't see that as a threshold, they see it as a guiding principle, and as long as areas are able to explain why they've gone for that population size, as long as it's within reason, they view that that will be acceptable. In doing that assessment, we have taken out the 2 model, the 5 model and the alternative 4, and I'll come on to more detail about why in a second. And we've shortlisted the 3 and the 4 model, and we've assessed those against our objectives. When we've done that assessment, and again I'll go into that in more detail in a second, we have determined that we think that actually the 4 option is the preferred option. I'll whiz past that. So, against the government's criteria, what we've broadly said is that the 2 model, very, very broadly, and this is a very broad brush, is too big. It doesn't have that geographic coherence. It certainly doesn't promote stronger community engagement, because our argument is that actually the geography that those 2 unitaries are covering are so large that they will become disconnected from the communities that they serve. They won't be able to be flexible to be able to change public services, and they will not be recognisable to the communities. The 5 model, we've said, I suppose, the other side of the argument, we've said that this splits East Lancashire too much. East Lancashire is a financially challenged area. It has low council tax and business rates base and high levels of demand for services, and therefore splitting that area into 2 will create significant challenges in those 2 councils being financially sustainable in the long term. And that means that we don't think it is the right size for efficiency and effective public service delivery. And then finally, the alternative 4 put forward by Blackpool, we've said is too complex. The government's been clear that it says district footprint should be the building blocks, and only in exceptional circumstances should you deviate from that. We don't think those exceptional circumstances exist in that proposal. And because it's very, very complex, and because it has a couple of very small councils, particularly the North Lancashire Council is a very small population, quite an elderly population, and so therefore has very high levels of demand at the moment for adult social care. We again don't think that'll be sustainable. I pressed the wrong button. We've then assessed the remaining 2 against the objectives that we talked about earlier. And we've broadly said, yes, we think the 4s fit those objectives, but the 3 unitary model doesn't. It doesn't provide that opportunity for radical change of public services with a greater focus around prevention and intervention, because it tries to maintain the status quo as much as possible. It puts areas together that actually don't recognise themselves as communities, and we don't think that it will promote economic growth in the same way, because it will have a far more Lancashire inwardly focused introspective view than one that looks across the whole of the north. Having identified that our preferred option is the 4 model through the business case, we've then put forward arguments about why we think things would be better. And I should be clear as a caveat here that actually this is in the context that the government has been clear that local government reorganisation is taking place. And so I think when council discussed this some months ago, I think the feeling within council was this is the option that we think should be implemented based upon local government reorganisation happening, rather than because we're particularly in a place where we've been chasing for it. So if it is going to happen and we're bringing forward a 4 option, we argue, as I've said a few times, this will kickstart economic growth. It provides the basis to have a mayoral strategic authority. It provides the basis to develop strong relationships with our neighbouring regions. It reflects local communities, so while they are bigger councils than the current district councils serving those communities, broadly we think that they make sense. And from a South Lancashire perspective, you would see that actually that area is made up of market towns, villages and rural areas. and smaller conurbations rather than cities. For the North Lancashire unitary, that puts forward 2 university cities connected by the M6A6 corridor, and then the Forest of Bowland, currently served by Lancaster and Ribble Valley together. And so it has those commonalities within each of those councils. They are financially sustainable. We've done the financial modelling, and it demonstrates that actually those 4 councils, whilst continuing to be financially challenged as the whole of local government is, are financially sustainable. And because of that, and because of the opportunity to change, we think that we can better serve residents. I've talked a little bit about the finances. This is extremely high level. I do appreciate that. It's useful to put in the context of the overall budget size. So local government spend within Lancashire is £2 billion. The financial modelling we've done has taken into consideration some of the real world risks of doing reorganisation. So one is that the disaggregation of social care could be very disruptive for very vulnerable residents. So we've put an additional £5 million-ish on an annual investment into social care to support that transition within our financial modelling. There is a cost of transition, and we've taken that into consideration. So around about £55 million is on that. Even having taken into consideration those costs, our financial modelling shows that we get to a break-even point within a few years, and you are looking around about £200 million worth of savings in those first 5 years of operation. So the key messages within the business case is that it starts with communities. The proposal is based upon communities that we recognise. Those councils are financially sustainable. It should kickstart economic growth and should provide the opportunity to transform public services. That is very, very high level the case. Just as a reminder, the next steps obviously includes the discussion and debate at this meeting. The anticipation is that any recommendations coming from this committee will then be considered by a special cabinet meeting later this week in readiness for submission of however many cases in the end get agreed by Lancashire. At the moment that would seem to be 5 by the 28th of November, and then we go into the timeline, which is far more controlled by the government again, because they will be setting when they do the consultation and when they make the decision. I hope I haven't been too long, Chair. Sorry.
No, I think you've been remarkably succinct. Councillor Tomlinson, do you have anything further to add?
Thank you, and I thank the Chief Exec for that actually quite, as you said, succinct and fairly brief submission. A couple of things just from the political point of view, and I'm grateful for the Chief Executive mentioning it, but I'm going to say it again. This is not something that we've been looking for as a council. I'm really, I've been here a long time, and I'm really proud of what we've achieved over those years. I'm really proud of South Ribble and what we do and what we've done. So this is not coming from us. We're not campaigning for it. But in the real world, we have to accept that the government have said this is happening. And so it's our responsibility to do our best to get the solution which we believe is the best one for our residents. That being said, we can't just have, this is what we want for South Ribble, so we've had to talk to other councils and stakeholders, and I'm really grateful to Jay in his role as lead member for local government reorganisation and devolution. He's been going around the county talking to council leaders and other stakeholders, and I believe we've come up with a solution that just ticks all the boxes that the government has asked. And whilst it's not our role to critique the other submissions, other people will put their own submissions in, it does seem quite clear to us that if we're trying to do what the government says it wants to do and still protect as much as we can the people of South Ribble, that the 4 Lancashire option is the best fit. I accept it's not perfect, and can I say I accept the process hasn't been perfect either. Here we are all examining a 200-page document 4 days after it was released, and one of those days was a Saturday and another one was a Sunday. So I accept all of that, but we are fixed to a timetable that's been set by the government, and that's just the reality of what we're having to deal with. We're also having to work with all the other councils on the dates that this was to be released. And I know we had an interesting conversation with the chairman of this committee over the weekend about when it was appropriate for this to be released to all members. It's not our documents. We share it with all the other councils, certainly well with the 5 that are supporting our submission. And so we just have to acknowledge that that's the reality of where we are. I don't think I've anything else to say at this stage, Chair.
I'd just like to add a couple of bits. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I think it's very important that we all recognise this is a council position we've got to get to here, and there has been a lot of work thanks to Holly, Chris and the team. I have been going around meeting other leaders, and I can assure you that they're in a very similar situation to us. The government have said it's going to happen, so it's going to happen. In some respects, it may be better or easier if the government has told us what they're going to do, but they haven't. So they've asked us to do the work. The work's been done. There has been some public consultation too, and you'll find that no different than what it was 50 years ago when this happened, last time it happened. The public senses they don't like change, and that's fair enough. And I was only saying to Matt before, I went back and read some of the articles from 1974. This come from the Local Government Act of 1972, coming to the 1st of April 1974, this change. And there's people now on Facebook saying, in Bolton, I'm from Lancashire, I'm not from Greater Manchester, even to this day, 50 years later. So that's the impact this type of thing does have. And it's just fell on our, and it's our time to do this. So I just hope that everyone realises and recognises that it's being done very transparently and very fairly. So take any questions tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Just in terms of procedure at this stage, if members of the committee will raise their hands when they wish to speak, my colleague on my left and our officer on our right will be looking at the screen and the members to give me a little bit of extra in terms of having 4 eyes and some in the back of my head, which will be useful. I'm very grateful to the members of this committee who spent quite a lot of the weekend with their head stuck in this document, reading it and coming to try to understand it. I realise that those who've produced it have done an awful lot of work in up to this stage. The timescales are not ideal, but they are what we've got. As for those of you who only got it through the agenda earlier today, if you've managed all 200 pages of the presentation and appendices in this afternoon, I take my hat off to you. Can I also welcome our 2 aldermen who crept in after the beginning of the meeting? It's good to have you with us.
Yeah, can I just say why we keep it after the meeting is that we've been waiting outside trying to attract somebody's attention to get in.
Right.
That's a reminder the caretaker that it was a public meeting. So,
My apologies about that.
well, I'm not getting you, but just for future reference.
Yes, yes, we will learn the lessons.
There might be other members of the public who might be
Right.
to get in.
Thank you. I'm going to open up the questioning with a question about localism. And it was sparked by a section in the appendices which talked about the NHS and what they called hyper-localism. I've had the opportunity twice in the last couple of weeks to visit the Harris in Preston to see the Wallace and Gromit exhibition. I had 2 thoughts out of that. The first was that the sets and the puppets are different sizes depending on what set and view was required, which is a bit of a parable, if you like, for local government reform. The second thing is how the Harris were very keen to say that Nick Park was from Preston. We all know he's from Longton and Walmer Bridge. So that illustrates different levels of locality and where our connections are. How do these proposals deal with large localism, such as the large Preston, as well as the smaller Longton or the medium Penwortham and Leyland?
So I think I'd make a couple of points. Life outside local government exists, and people do live their lives outside local government, and so people in South Ribble will travel quite happily to Preston for work, or indeed to Manchester or Liverpool for work, without even thinking that they're crossing a council boundary. You know, so we ought to recognise that. We also ought to recognise that Preston will try and steal any glory they can from South Ribble, and that's just always been the way of it. I think this is all of this has been a balancing act. It's all about the balance. You know, if you wanted complete efficiency in the delivery of local government services, you'd have a very, very large council with very few councillors on it who would just get on and deal with business. But my argument is that's not local democracy. And if we believe in some local democracy with local people having a voice in how their money is spent, then it's about finding a size of council that can deliver the efficiencies that the government wants while still remaining local and people still feeling it's their council. And so, as I've said right all through this process, there isn't a correct answer. This is not an exam that we're taking and we can say this is what it should look like. What we're saying is this is our preferred option, and that option will have rightfully have questions asked of it. But again, as I said, for me, how big does a council have to be before it's a sustainable unitary, delivering things like adult social care and SEND and all those big issues, while still remaining close enough to people that it feels like a local council? And I think that the option, the 4 option, is the one that best fits those questions.
Thank you. And kind of subsequent to that, our citizens strongly own their parishes and towns. Can a stronger argument be made for their inclusion in these proposals?
I think there's been a lot of concern from parish and town councils about how this is going to affect them. Actually, the short answer to that is it isn't, because they will continue in their current form to deliver what they want to deliver for their very local communities. It may well be that there are opportunities for parish and town councils under the models that are being considered, because I certainly, and I know the government are really keen, that as we look through these proposals, one of the things we look at is how can you make sure that there is some locality-based work being done. So, for instance, if we go to this 4 model, we might want to see a Leyland committee that just looks at Leyland and has a devolved budget. We might want to, look to Penwitham, and perhaps we could get that utopia of a Penwitham committee working hand in hand with the town council to deliver services in there. So the parish and town councils will continue to exist in exactly the current form, but this could be opportunities actually for them to work with the new unitaries to actually expand the work that they do. And certainly there could be, I would envisage money being devolved from that new council down to local areas where local members and local people can have a greater voice in how that money is spent.
Thank you. Councillor Ashton.
There are actually 2 areas I wanted to ask about. I'm just asking you, Chair. I mean, one, as you know, one is around the area committees. I can't remember the exact. And then the other one was about process. I don't know, but do we want to go into the area committees question? I think that probably makes more sense. So, yeah, there's a section in the submission, I can't remember what they're called now, the neighbourhood area committees, with a very precise number of 42. So it would be really interesting to understand a bit more really what they'll do, how they'll relate to other groups, including town and parish councils, because if there's only 42 for the whole of Lancashire, I can't see we're actually going to get one that is as small as Penwitham. We'd probably be somewhere else. So just to understand a bit more about the thinking behind those, and because, as I say, if it's 42, they're actually something that's relatively substantial.
So The honest answer is really it depends. And the reason it depends, and we'll probably revisit this a few times during this evening, is that this is making a proposal for how we think it might be able to work, and I'll come on to what we think within the proposal. But ultimately this will be a decision for each of those new unitaries of whatever size or scale they are, to make a decision about what functions does that council delegate to a neighbourhood area committee, what budget does it have, what decision-making ability does it have, and also who does it work with. So the leader has put forward in his previous answer that there is absolutely models of neighbourhood area committees which I suspect would be well supported by members here used to working in our community hubs, that would have your town council, your parish council or significant other community groups integrated into that neighbourhood area committee and its decision making. And I think that's what we as people who've developed the proposal alongside other councils envisage happening. We envisage happening, and 42 is very specific. It is broadly trying just to break down Lancashire as a whole into areas, because we've also got to acknowledge that we do not know every community across the whole of Lancashire. And so it broadly tries to look at how would you potentially break it down. We would anticipate that as part of any transition to new councils, there will have to be more work done, and particularly more work done once we know what those councils are being in, how many neighbourhood area committees there are, exactly what area does that cover. But what we wanted to demonstrate in the proposal is we do not anticipate that all local government functions will be delivered singly from the unitary basis. And in part, that's because it goes up and down. We anticipate that some things will happen across Lancashire at that strategic, the combined authority level or other partnerships, but we anticipate that quite a lot will be devolved down and actually makes a link back to Councillor Pillinger's early point around some of the movement and direction of travel within the National Health Service around neighbourhood working, where again we anticipate there should be greater levels of coordination between those areas.
Councillor Ashton, I'm going to take a question from Councillor Martin and then come back to you.
Thank you, Chair. It's about numbers, really. I mean, you sort of say there's going to be these 42, but anyone who's done a boundary review will know that it goes on how many councillors you get to how many electors there are, so that so one vote is worth the same amount of councillor anywhere you are in. So I sort of worry then, would this area have a lesser number of community hubs or community area hubs, simply because we wouldn't have the same amount of representation needed? And would that put us out of kilter or a disadvantage with those who would, say, have more councillors and more sway? Would they then get the more money? There's those sort of, and the other part with the parishes, as though you say it might not affect parishes directly, but we've noticed that there is a possibility that election cycles could be changed, and so there would need to be some consideration to how we can realign those, simply because of costs, and because what we don't want is one authority having to run the elections 24 every year sort of thing, and the cost of that could have an impact on parishes, because currently we're in a process where we may have to pay for these elections.
Just I'll kind of work backwards. In relation to alignment of elections, I know that is something that MHCLG civil servants are aware of, and I know they're making that consideration as they're doing things like structural change orders, which is the mechanism by which they formally make the change, to make sure that even if there is a misalignment in the first batch of elections, that actually term lengths and things are made as such, so that it then aligns with usual parish election years, which obviously is what we're used to within South Ribble. In relation to will we potentially be more poorly represented, I'll give you the really technical answer, which is there is obviously within this proposal a reduction in the number of democratically elected councillors that currently are within Lancashire to what then is proposed. You could not have the same number of councillors because it would breach the Boundary Commission's guidelines of the size of a council, being 99 as a maximum. But you are right that there would be a boundary review. So almost certainly, not definitely, but almost certainly what will happen is that the government will announce these are the councils we're going to put into Lancashire, and there will be a number, and it might be the number that's within this proposal, that would take be elected to the shadow. And then in that first year between the shadow election and the usual set of elections for the new council, there'll be then a boundary review, and members around the committee will be experienced in knowing that actually that is a process of negotiation and you know, what type of community do you serve, very rural, very urban, a lot of you know, changes within communities that can influence. So it's very hard to say now you'll have 50 councillors here. What you can say is there will be a reduction on the number of elected councillors across district and county areas from now to that new area. What this proposal seeks to do, and that's what I think probably one of the reasons that that people have favoured the 4 unitary model, is that it still tries to make sure those councillors are working in a council that is able to relate to the area, rather than the one that is of a big scale with all the responsibilities that then can't make that relation back into the area. So apologies, I can't give you the exact yes, this will then happen, because we just don't know.
Thank you. Councillor Ashton, I'm going to come back to you in a moment. We're going to move away from the question of the sort of localism and parishes and so on for a minute or two in our questioning at this point. So I just want to ask if any of the members who are not members of the committee have any questions they want to raise on what we've already spoken about before we move on. And anyone online, I noticed Councillor Lillis demuted at one time. Did you have a question to ask?
No, we got covered in the further debate conversation.
Thank you very much. So I'm going back to... sorry, Councillor Walton.
Yeah, it's just a clarification, really. Because of the reduction of councillors from 663 to 288 for the whole of Lancashire, and you're talking about unitaries, whether we have the 3 or 4 unitaries, and then the community area committees with devolved services going perhaps down to them. Surely this is still going to be a 2-tier system, and then town and parish councils underneath that. I just want some clarification of, is that what's envisaged in the unitaries with community area committees and then town and parish councils?
Sorry, I mean, we already run area committees, neighbourhood forums, whatever word we've had for them over the years. We've always had those, and nobody's ever described that to me before as another tier of local government. It's just members of this council who represent an area having a say over what goes on in that area. And so I would envisage the new local area, neighbourhood, whatever they're calling them, being very much the same. You'll still be a member of the unitary council, and you will still be delivering the functions of that unitary council, but having some sway over what happens and flexing it to reflect the needs of your local area. So I'd certainly, I wouldn't be describing that as another tier of local government. It will be some element of devolution within a tier of local government. And it may well be that, you know, if we go down the 4 Lancashire option, that North Lancashire decide to do it slightly differently than South Lancashire, who might want to do it slightly differently than West Lancashire. And that, you know, that is local, that is the beauty of local government, that some councils do things differently than other councils because they believe that that's the best answer for their local communities and residents. And I think that's something certainly I would support and would say is a good thing.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just Karen, let's come back to you on that one. I think obviously some areas don't have parish and town councils, but others do. So the idea of the area committee is to bring some connectivity back in. That's the differentiation, really. But in terms of the other comments about parish and town councils. Quite clearly now, I'm in Penwithon because we recently did a session on this. They deliver a lot of services in terms of what goes on in Penwithon, which is really valuable to that community. So I think their position would be strengthened really in terms of what happens after this, because not only are they connected with the community, they deliver some, you know, services also for the community. So I think their role would be heightened and more significant.
Back to you, Councillor Ashton.
Are we changing? Yeah. So it was just a process issue really. Just trying to be clear in my head. So what happens now? So as the chief exec said, part of the reason why it's been so, I think it was chief exec, it might have been the leader, why it's taken us so long to get to this point. We've had 6 councils involved, and we've had to sort of reach a consensus. So what happened? What would happen if tonight we made some comments of scrutiny that the cabinet were inclined to take into account on Wednesday? Is there then a process where that would have to go back out into the rest of those councils? So that's one bit of process. And then I think my other bit of process is after the 28th of November. And you mentioned, Chris, on your slide that there will be a period of consultation after that. And it was really to understand a little bit more about that, and do the public get a chance to be consulted, and also does our case just sort of lie there and then some civil servant will make a decision and tell us what it's going to be, or do we have any opportunity to actually say something about our case? So there's a whole sort of processy set of things there, I think.
Councillor Aston, you said process, so I think you just said in relation to, should, for example, the Scrutiny Committee make recommendations to make changes to the proposal tonight, yes, it would just be the same process that we've gone through for the last few months, which is we would discuss with our councillors that are in partnering with us to develop this proposal. We would have to, you know, test and see whether they were comfortable with it. It really depends on what those level of changes would be. Ultimately, this council may make a decision to not support this and to support a different proposal. At some point, those proposals will be published. They're not all yet. So yes, it would be the same process we've been going through. There is a programme board made up of the chief executives who would work it through. We then would be liaising with the leaders to see what would be acceptable and what wouldn't. In relation to the consultation that would be undertaken by the government, the best place for councillors who are interested in that to look is actually Surrey, because Surrey have been moving on a faster timeline than the rest of the country, so they've had their announcement a few weeks ago around what will be put in place. So they undertook, the statutory consultation they undertook was around key stakeholders. It did include residents. It also included public sector partners, health, fire, police, businesses, voluntary community and faith sector, and other representatives, so parish councils, town councils, MPs, and they were all broadly asked about, and this is a decision made by the government, so they're the ones who decide what questions they're going to ask, but they had it open for quite a period of time to allow people to put forward their views. In relation to, once we put in our proposal, what happens with it, if I'm really honest, I don't actually fully know. My understanding from Surrey is there was a degree where local areas were asked to provide clarification on certain issues with civil servants. Ultimately, the decision doesn't rest with civil servants. Ultimately, the decision rests with the relevant minister and the Secretary of State. But obviously, they will be working off recommendations from within civil servants of MHCLG, but they have also set up to draw upon views of other parts of government, such as the Treasury, such as the Department for Education, such as the Department for Health and Social Care. So we don't know exactly what engagement there would be had. I think it will be pretty limited from within the council. There is nothing to stop individual councillors or us as a council from feeding our views into that strategy consultation, which will cover residents and then what we would probably see as our key stakeholders.
Councillor David Howarth.
Sorry. Yeah, it's just coming back to that. Clearly, this is a document that is being submitted on behalf of 6 different councils. Our cabinet is meeting on Thursday to presumably ratify it or not ratify it. Have the other 5 councils already signed up to this and ratified it? No.
Each council is different. Each council has a different cycle of meetings. And in fact, West Lancashire don't have a cabinet. So the government have been quite clear this is an executive decision. So this is not for full council. And in fact, we only debated it relatively recently. And I'm grateful to the 2 main opposition party leaders agreeing with me that we don't want to have a full debate in council again to go over what we talked about just in July. But so some councils are saying, well, we'd still want full council to debate it because we haven't debated it in full council for 2 years. And then we'll go to cabinet. In West Lancashire, they don't have a cabinet system. They still have the committee system. So that has to go to council. So each council has got a slightly different nuanced way about how this decision is being made, but it has to be an executive decision, however your council is made up, and it has to be made by the 28th of November. So we're all in slightly different cycles, but we've all got this paper now. We all know where we've got to be by the end of the month, and it will be up to each of the councils to take that through their own processes.
I think if I could just come back quickly, what I'm alluding to is that if we make recommendations this evening, and some of those recommendations might be a bit radical, what impact or change is that likely to have on this document as it's presented? And if not at all, can I go and watch the TV?
I think it really depends. I think it really does genuinely depend. The advantage you as a committee have is out of those 6 councils supporting the 4 unitary position, you are debating it first. There is a couple of the councils that are actually debating it, I think, on the 26th or 27th of November. The reality is the ability to make changes at that place will be far more difficult. So I can't guarantee, because we could find that actually we could put forward a proposal from South Ribble which is not accepted by any of the other councils. That would then be for the Cabinet to make a decision on whether they want to go with the proposal as is currently drafted or an alternative version. There is nothing that forces South Ribble Borough Council to either support any option or to support an option that it doesn't agree with. It could adapt and say, well, we support this proposal but with these changes to it. It's not neat, and there is no real neat way of doing it because there's 15 democratically accountable organisations looking at versions of what could local government reorganisation look like in Lancashire.
Thank you. Councillor Pritchard.
Just going back to the consultation period, is that consultation being run through the government or is it being run at our level?
Through government. So they will ask us for, have we got any suggested community groups or other people to be taken, but it is the government's consultation.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's just a plea really that when we get to that stage that we actually look at doing an equality impact assessment around that piece of work. I'm just very mindful that we include all of our communities, and sometimes we just need to look through our voluntary and community sector members who can help us to make sure we get to the need to reach people. Thank you.
Councillor Green.
Thanks, Chairman. Can I thank Mr Sinnott and Councillors Tomlinson and Flannery for the presentations earlier this evening. Just picking up on the point about debates, etc. Whilst I accept we had a debate in July, and probably there'd be nothing to be gained from having a further debate on local government reorganisation. Nevertheless, the proposals before us are talking about linking the proposed new unity councils in with a greater role for the combined county authority, transforming to a mayoral strategic authority. The concern I have is, from the best recollection that I have, this council has never set out whether or not they are in favour of an elected mayor for Lancashire. Obviously there are advantages to having that role, but equally there are disadvantages. And for us to actually sign up to a document which puts us on the path to creating that elected mayor is, I think, a step for which there is no democratic mandate. Thank you.
I take your point. The combined county authority that currently exists for Lancashire that is made up of constituent members of the County Council, Blackburn with Darwen and Blackpool Council, have not yet made a decision. There is a little bit of jumping the gun, I accept, but actually all of the indications from that combined county authority is that within a short period of time, they will be making a request to government to convert that to a mayoral strategic authority. So to a degree, we are looking at the real world position that we think Lancashire will be in at that point by a decision made that wouldn't be made by this council. And secondly, also looking forward to a world where the government in its white paper and now bill has been extremely clear that that is the direction of travel. To my memory, I think the current bill also includes potential power for Secretaries of State to use to introduce directly elected mayors into any area that doesn't currently have it. So I suppose that's the technical answer for why it's within the proposal rather than the point around the mandate for it.
Can I just feedback what I'm hearing on that, just to be clear? You're saying that the decision to move to a mayoral authority does not lie with us, but lies with the county and the two unitaries together, with us just in one of those advisory roles that the district councils have, and that the government are taking powers that would enable them to impose such an authority on us, even if those bodies didn't.
So I'll need to check that I'm not dreamt, and there is a distinct possibility I could have dreamt the one around the powers, because it shows probably too much there. But at the moment, in the way that the combined county authority and the devolved arrangements are established, the decision around whether there should be an elected mayor for Lancashire rests with the combined county authority and its constituent members, which are the upper tier councils at this point in time. And so at this point, no, South Ribble Council doesn't have a decision. I think the point made by Councillor Green is that we're proposing it, and to a large degree we're doing that based upon our supposition that that is what's going to be in place, and also that that is what the government's stated aim is in its white paper.
Councillor Tomlinson.
And I think we just have to be aware that we're working in the real world here. We haven't made a decision whether we want an elected mayor or not, and we're probably never going to be asked whether we want one or not. But that is clearly the direction of travel of how local government in England works. Cheshire have said they're going down that line. Even Cumbria have accepted that they're going to have an elected mayor, and that will leave Lancashire in the whole of the north of England as the only area that doesn't operate with an elected mayor, bringing councils together to work on some projects. Now, I would suggest to this committee that it is highly unlikely that the government, with the intentions it's already expressed, is going to leave Lancashire on its own as a one area without an elected mayor. But there is some suppositions. There's quite a few suppositions in this when you look at it. Suppositions about how many councillors there's going to be, suppositions about how the local neighbourhood forums,
Joint Area Committee,
whatever they're called, you know what I mean. Because on a lot of these things, we're assuming, we're saying what we'd like, and that's all part of the submission. You know, it mentions a number of councillors. That might not be how it all pans out in the end, but these are all suggestions that if local government, and I keep saying that, we're not campaigning for any of this, if local government reorganisation is to happen, this is how we see as being one possibility of it happening, and this is our preferred option.
Thank you. Councillor Flannery, you had your hand up a couple of minutes ago.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you. So I'll just one comment on that, and I'll just go back to what Deborah and Leslie asked before. So on the basis of what I announced last Friday was £7 billion for housing for the devolved authorities. On alone, prior to that, the City region of Manchester got 3.7 billion for infrastructure work. So the idea that we won't be getting a devolved powers and a mayor. It just seems a bit unrealistic, so I think we will welcome that when it happens. Just coming back to what you said before about consultation, Leslie, and also you, Deborah, there has been a survey which was done, jointly procured across Lancashire. It happened in August and September, and they asked the people, because this is what's going to happen, once this report goes out, people will get asked again what's important to them, and what they said was it was localism, infrastructure and transport, safety and police and health and social care. But the interesting thing is, which is really important, because this comes back to this idea of change, because no one likes change. You don't go whether you know, it's a difficult thing for people to digest. But 63% of all residents said they're happy with the services they currently get off the councils. Now, sometimes if you read the press, you think there's a lot of wrong in society. I think there's a lot of right in society, personally. But actually, residents, 63% of those residents also said, and there was 14,000 residents surveyed, which said they're not only happy, they would prefer to keep it as it is. So that's inconsistent with what the government are actually imposing on us here. So when we get the next round of information, which we're doing here, and as you say before, Leslie, when it goes out to the government will then do the next part of the consultation. Get ready, because a lot of people will kick back on this, and a lot of people will say we don't want the change. But the reality is the change is coming, but the 4 key things have already come out in terms of localism, infrastructure, safety and police and health and social care.
Thank you. Councillor Leslie Pritchard and then Councillor Michael Green.
Yep, thank you, Jay. I wonder in that case whether there's an opportunity to be considered where we look to places like Cumbria and North Yorkshire, and some of the realised service improvements and outcomes for residents are actually discussed with our community. So because I think for a lot of people they can't imagine what it might look like, and there's a lot of pluses and benefits that are being realised, I'm sure, across the North Yorkshire, Cumbria, and I wonder whether there's a bit of a project there around actually relaying that to our communities in a clear way. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. Can I just urge, obviously, members here tonight, because I made a commitment to sort of go around to any community to sort of in my lead role in this intervening period when we've got some time. Penwith have done it, Bamber Bridge, Dave and the team are doing it. I urge you all, if you just want me to come down and do a presentation and bring the community together, we can do it. And this intervening period, I think, would be a good time to do that, Leslie, because it makes people aware. Because as I said at a business event recently, when all the businesses were saying, our cases, we prefer this and we prefer that. And I asked the businesses how many had gone to the local councillors and, you know, gone through that process, and none of them had. So it's really important, I think, as representatives of our community, that we engage with them. And then if you want to invite me along, or obviously Matt the leader and other colleagues, we'll be more than happy in this period between now and, you know, and when the government decide what's going to happen, that we can get some further information out there so people are better informed.
Councillor Green.
Thanks, Chairman. If I may, this was something I was going to raise later in the meeting, but a couple of references have been made to it, so I want to pick up on it now. Councillor Tomlinson has a couple of times said this evening this is not something that he's chasing, and it's something that's being imposed by the government. And going back to the debate in July, I don't think that was a view of council as well. I mean, I recall there was an amendment put forward for an enhanced 2-tier system that fell. But I think the general view as council was that we didn't want to see the end of South Hill, and I think yourself as leader set that out very clearly on that evening and have repeated that this evening. And that's why I was somewhat concerned when I read the documents that this is just the case which is being put forward, and this is what we believe is the best case of the 4 unitaries, with ourselves falling into a new unity with neighbours in West Lancs and Chorley, without setting out right at the front and centre of the document that our preferred position is to remain as South Hibble Borough Council. We can all argue all day long about the politics of the council and how we do things slightly different here or there depending upon political leanings, but nevertheless we all feel that South Hibble is a good council and we'd like to see it continuing. And I just felt that should be front and centre, and then go on to say, but if the government is determined to see local government reform taking place, then we might have a preferred option, which presumably would be the preferred option that went through from July, which you're submitting now. So I'm just wondering why that was not made explicitly clear right at the beginning.
I think what we have to remember is we're working, this is not a South Ribble document. This is a document that we share with 5 other councils, and the government have been quite clear that local government reform is happening. 2-tier government in England is ending. And so, as I've said before, we are not campaigning for this. We've never said this is what we want, but recognising what the government is saying, recognising the journey that local government right across England has been on for 15 years or so, then it's our responsibility to work with other councils in Lancashire to come up what we think is the best outcome for the residents of South Ribble. Now, I've been quite clear, and as you know, I'm grateful that you said so. I've been quite clear all through this. This is not something I want. This is not something I'm chasing. But what I'm doing as a leader is what I think is the responsible thing to do, is react to the journey that we're on to try and make sure we get the best deal for the residents of South Ribble out of any change that's coming. Now, you know, you could argue I should have put a paragraph in saying, I don't want this, I want to stay, but it's not my document. It's not this council's document. It's something we're putting forward in partnership with West Lancashire, Chorley, Preston, Ribble Valley and Lancaster. And as such, I think, you know, it reflects quite well on the opportunities without being too negative. It would be very easy to stand there like Canute and say, you know, I'm going to stop this happening. I'm not going to be able to stop this happening, and neither is any other district or city council leader in the county. So that being said, let's have a look at what's the best we can get out of it, and we've come together and we think I think Councillor Flannery said at the council meeting in July, when we agreed that we thought the 4 unitary option was probably the best one, we would go away and do the work, and if the evidence came back and said it wasn't, then we'd change our minds. I'm pleased that the evidence that's come back and says actually this is probably the best one, not only for South Ribble but for the rest of Lancashire, and so that's the submission we're going to put forward.
Thank you. Councillor King.
Yeah, just to build on the point that we've just made there, and also on something that Councillor Flannery said, which is that 63% of respondents said that they would prefer to stick as they are. Now, we were speaking about mandates before, and one thing that I'm conscious of is that this does not have popular support amongst the public. Generally in this room, there seems to be a bit of a consensus that we're quite happy with what it is that we've got. This wasn't in any party's manifestos when we had an election just recently. So as a result, as part of a caveat with this, would we want to be saying that before we go and press go, do we not want to get support and a mandate from the public, whether that be through an election before this happens or whether that be through a referendum?
That's really not for me to respond to. The government have been quite clear on this, and like any manifesto, the government appointing, there was a section in that said they would work with a streamlined and more efficient local government to deliver services. That's all it said, but they point to that and said, well, that's what we meant by this. The fact is, I think, you know, I'd like to lead this council in a way that deals with the reality that's out there, not the reality that I've got in my head, not the reality that I wish happened, but the reality that's out there. And the reality is, and we've asked and asked and asked, this is happening. So we can you know, rail against the machine and say we don't want this and we're not going to engage, or we engage productively to say if, and you know, if this is happening, and that's what we said at full council in July. If this is happening, then this is the preferred option, and that remains our point. If this is happening, then we think this is the best option, not just for South Ribble, but for the whole of Lancashire. And we've got 5 other councils who agree with that point. And so, you know, that's the submission that we're pursuing at the moment.
I'm going to take Councillor Williams and then I'll come to Councillor Panley. He might be able to answer both.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was going to delve a little deeper sort of into the financial side of it. I've been reading through, obviously, thanks very much, Chris, for the presentation about the higher level view of the sort of RAG statusing, the various different options that a 3 would bring and what a 4 would bring when we did the options appraisal further down. I found that really useful, because looking at just the purely financial side of it, the financial options for a 3 are very similar to a 4, if not give better savings as it were. To me, there seems to be a little bit of a danger that we've gone around the discussion that we're definitely having enough of all the options we want the 4. What I'm worried about is the case for 4 strong enough in the document from a financial point and from a non-financial point to really stress that it's 4 we want or nothing else? Because the case for 3, I'm not saying we want the 3, I'm not going about the case for one or the other. All I'm saying is we want 4, and the case for either one of them isn't succinct or distinct. I'm trying to think of a better way of making that more distinct.
I think it's quite an astute question, and it is one that we, as a group of chief executives and other officers developing the proposal, were aware of. In very broad terms, one of the drivers, if not the driver, of the government in wanting larger councils that have 500,000 populations, is a view that is how you get economies of scale. That is how you make sure that those organisations are financially sustainable. And the leader said earlier that to a degree that is true. I think we could probably get into an extremely academic argument around diseconomies of scale, and actually truly do you always get efficiencies through larger organisations. And so our aim in undertaking the financial modelling was to try and undertake as robust financial modelling as you can, based upon lots of assumptions across an enormous amount of area of service delivery, revenue and expenditure over a long period of time, not to just get the right numbers to be able to say, we win in this. And each of those other 4 proposals that are being made across Lancashire will have similar discussions. As a group of 15 councils across Lancashire, we agreed the financial baseline, so how much money should be in and how much demand should be in to start with, but then layered upon the top of that will be assumptions made by each proposal. And so I think you're right to say there isn't an enormous financial difference between the 3 unitary model and the 5 unitary model. My response would be there still is a distinction, and actually over the longer term that distinction gets bigger, because our assumptions are around how can you make sure that you are better focusing on prevention and early intervention, how are you reducing demand for demand-led services, and our argument is that is better achieved within the 4 unitary model, where those councils are more local to communities and based upon communities that make sense, than the 3 model. But also that what this business case really demonstrates is that the 3 model does not have an enormous financial benefit over the 4. So if your starting point is you should go for bigger because it'll be more financially sustainable, more resilient, we're saying we don't think that's the case. And so actually that financial resilience point should fall away, because the 3 model and the 4 model are as financially resilient as each other, and therefore let's look at the other non-financial benefits, of which the argument goes the 4 model, because it is more flexible, because it is more based and rooted in communities, we get all those benefits and we don't fall down because of financial modelling. So I appreciate your point, but actually we're saying actually that takes away from the 3 because it doesn't have a winning argument of a financial model that trumps the 4.
Councillor Flannery.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to come back to Will, please, on the point I made before. I made the point really about the survey, because I don't think a lot of people are aware that that survey happened. Like I said, it was nearly 14,000 participants. But my point is, Will, the fact that people don't know about it, I don't think it's being conveyed or it's been disseminated quite clearly about the significance of this change. I think we can all agree on that. But what I was saying was, right now, what the residents are saying is, because the year have changed, 63%, as it was right, you rightly just said, they're happy with what they've got. They don't want change, really. But my point is, if we, as local councillors who know our residents, if we can have this dialogue with them, and then we can explain to them why, how and when, if you give them some context, to say, look, it's happening this. It's not like it's not happening, or we've decided. Maybe that's the point I think was made before. We haven't decided, the governments have decided. But if we then give them the context of that, and then explain the rationale and some of the issues which we're discussing tonight a bit more, because one of our things is, as councillors, we're sort of embedded in this, but a lot of residents will be watching the telly now, we're having the tea. They're not here watching us talk about this, but it's so significant for them. So I think the more, what I was saying before, the more we sort of come together as a group, as all, 50 councillors here in our communities, and utilise, while we've got this lead role and a commitment from the leader, we can sort of explain to them more, because you're quite right, when the government say, here's a big consultation across Lancashire, and it's all changing, if people come from a cold, they're going to go, what's this? If we've already sort of softened it for them and explained it to them, and realise it's not an attritional position, it's just change is going to happen, and whether we like it or not, it is going to happen, and we've just got to deal with that at the moment. So that's my point really back on that. And let's come back to the other thing about the financial one. But what's really important, I think, is as a council, councils are enabling functions with respect, and take this the right way. We're not the most significant and important thing, particularly with businesses, and the point Aidan made before about the financial side. Businesses don't see the political boundaries. They just want to know whether they can get a planning application in, who to moan at when they've got an issue in terms of a councillor. But the rest of the time, all the creativity, all the risk-taking is done by those people out there. We are the enablers. We look after licensing, we look after planning, we look after those things. So whether it's a South Ribble or it's a South Lancashire, the function will still be the same. So in terms of the financial viability, the business will continue. The enabling function is obviously going to change. Thank you.
What I would say to that is, I think financial things that would continue is not necessarily the case, because there's been authorities around the country that are in financial trouble that have had to cut services. That's the argument I make to that. But going back to some of the financials that are in there, I've had to flick through some of the appendices and some of the graphs and bits and pieces. Staff savings are sort of projected at about 30%. It's like where those sorts of assumptions come from. The only bit I'm worried about here is there's been illustrations about savings and costs and things like that, and there's been some. I'm just worried that these going to become targets that we have to save that amount because we've illustrated it, because there's a stretch target in there that if we try and do X, Y and Z a little bit different, we can get to a stretch target. Is this going to be like a stretch that we've got to achieve something, or is it just more of an indication? I just don't want to be on the hook for, well, you said you would save 80 million quid over X amount of period of time. Why have you not done that? Whatever that figure may or may not be, what I'm just worried about is that these become targets, and then we have to stop cutting services to achieve targets as part of this. I'm just wondering the assurance that that's not the case.
Mr.
Sinnott. No, they won't become targets unless the government significantly change their approach that they've taken in all of the local government reorganisation and the current round in Surrey. The responsibility for councils, as you all know, is to set a balanced budget for the forthcoming financial year. So at the moment, these are indications, they are modelling to demonstrate what could be achieved, but it would be subject to lots and lots of decisions by that new authority. That new authority's job will be to set a balanced budget. Now, it might draw upon some of these, it might use some of the principles that we're putting forward, but no, it would not become, you said you were going to make £100 million of savings, where is it? The other thing you mentioned very briefly is where did some of the modelling come from? As far as we have been able to, we have drawn upon research and case studies elsewhere. The government starting point for a lot of this was on the work done for the county councils network, and this is where the £500,000 figure originally came from, and so we use that as one of our sources. We've also looked at other unitary councils. So, for example, what size of senior leadership team, what costs do they have within their senior leadership team? We've looked at what's the demand for some services, and what are some of the figures that you have around the benefits of prevention and early intervention. And we've tested that with ourselves and with the consultants we've been working on to make sure that we weren't being overly optimistic. So some of those figures are based on very broad brush numbers. Some of them are based upon where we've been able to have research. None of them will create a target for those new councils, because the world will, it's the point the leaders made, the real world will kick in. One council might have a significant uplift in the number of homeless presentations or demand for very complex children's service cases. That council will have to deal with those regardless of what we've written in here.
Thank you. Councillor Bollenberg.
Thank you. This was just actually to raise something that Councillor Flannery mentioned, and then Councillor King took up. You mentioned this figure of 63%, and the description seems to have subtly changed. So initially when you mentioned it, you said that 63% of people who responded said they were happy with their services. Then the way that Councillor King described it was that 63% didn't want to change. And now that's come back to you and you're saying something similar. So I'm just wondering could we get a bit of clarity on what that 63% actually said?
Yeah, absolutely. It's 2 points. I've got it here. 63% of respondents are happy with the service they currently get, and 63% of different bullet would prefer to keep the current structure. So it's
And I would add another caveat to that a survey only tells you what the respondents said. Now, we are aware of one council that wrote a letter to every single household encouraging them to take part in this survey and intimated that this was going to get rid of their local council and could they respond to the survey. And if you look at the survey, and there is something in there that tells you about where the people lived who responded, and quite a significant chunk of the people who responded live in the area where the council wrote to every single. So, you know, it is a survey. It's 14,000 people, so it's not insignificant, but you have to look at where the respondents came from and what they're responding to. Now, somebody said, I think it was Jay who said, look at businesses, they're not bothered where the lines are as long as they're getting the support and the encouragement and that enabling work to get work done. I would suggest to this committee, most of our residents, most of the time, are not interested where the line, whether it's one ward ends and another ward begins, or where South Ribble ends and Chorley begins. What they want a council that delivers good, reliable services, that makes sure the infrastructure we've got supports us moving around and living our lives, that prevents people falling into poor housing or poor health. And if we can move to a model that does that, then most of our residents will be quite happy with that. I'm sorry to say this to you all, but we're all a bit weird because we obsess about this, don't we? We do, and quite rightly so. Someone has to, and that's why we stand for election and try and get involved in how the local council's running. But 95% of our residents don't really get that engaged with local politics until it's something in their street. And for a lot of this, us arguing about where lines on a map are, they're raising kids, they've got 2 jobs, they're trying to pay the mortgage. I reflect, I've been on the local news a few times, and when people say, oh, saw you on the local news, I can't remember what I said. They just know that they saw me because they were bathing the kids, or they were cooking, and I popped up on the news. Oh, that's him. And so I think, are our residents interested in this? They probably are a bit. But actually, what they want is a sustainable, financially secure, well-run council that delivers the services that they expect, and that's what we've got to concentrate on.
Thank you. I'm going to take 4 more speakers The first of which is Councillor Pritchard, and then we would go. I've noted you as well. So I've got Councillor Pritchard, Councillor King, Councillor Walton, and Councillor Martin, and I now see Councillor Green. So I'll make it 5. At which point we'll take a comfort break.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Councillor Flannery for offering to come out and talk to communities. And I wonder whether, and just reflecting on what Councillor Tomlinson's just said about the 95%, there is a level in communities where you have mostly the third sector who are gateways of information to people, probably better gateways than we are. And there may be, and I was just visualising, if we set up a hub meeting or even a smaller meeting, I'm just thinking we probably wouldn't get that many people come through the door. But if we set up, and this is a question really, if you could consider inviting the third sector and really importantly people who deliver services to the elderly, people who deliver services to families with SEND, with kids who attend special needs school, if that's the right word. I think what would happen is that you'd get a buy-in from that third sector organisations, which would then disseminate down to the community from people that they absolutely trust. And I think that might be a level whereby, whether that's an open day, whether that's an invitation to a forum, but I just wondered whether that could be a consideration. Thank you.
I think I'm going to take that as something to note, right, because it wasn't quite a question, and move on to Councillor King, and then I'll ask our visitors to reply to both of those.
Yeah, I think coming back to Councillor Flannery, and to be fair, I think a lot of us are actually saying the same thing here, which is a conversation is needed to be had, and that 63% is based off little context. But the take I have from this is that that conversation isn't really being able to be had. This is more something that seems to be done to people rather than allowing us to have this conversation and allowing people to say it's just being more flung upon them. But the main reason I wanted to speak was actually just to pick up further on some of the financial side of things. I agree with what you say, Councillor Tomlinson, that people don't really care whether they're on one side of a boundary or another. I think where they do care, though, is when it comes to, and I feel like this is a bit of an elephant in the room, which is that I feel a bit of an assumption in the report that the greater the size of the authority, the more financial resilience we have. But what I can't understand is South Ribble, who has a surplus, partnering with councils that have deficits. How would we be more financially resilient by taking on the debts of other areas?
I think several things as far as Councillor Pritchard comments have been made and your initial comments. I think Councillor Flannery's agreed to go and talk to anybody, and that's what he's been doing for the last 9 months. So anybody who thinks they can set up a meeting of a parish council or somebody from the VCFS who wants to talk to Councillor Flannery, he's done a great job of representing this council, and I'm sure he'll do that. When it comes to, you know, sustainability, there's no, and I've said this, there is no correct answer to the size of what this new council will look like. There isn't, you know, there isn't one that you can put forward and say that blows all the others out of the water. There will always be pros and cons. We've come to the judgment that this is probably the best, and so that's the option we'll pursue. What we have to remember is what will come after any change are brand new councils. It won't be that bit of Lancashire County Council still exists with its debts and its plans, and it won't be South Ribble and its bits. It'll be a brand new council. And what you've seen in Surrey, for instance, the one that the chief exec referred to, there's a big chunk of debt just being written off, yeah, because one council in particular has got significant debts that nobody else wanted to join in with it, and the government have said, although they've said it's a one-off and it's not a precedent for all other reorganisations, they have said that, look, there's an issue with the council here, and it's not fair to join it with others who don't have that level of debt. So the government have introduced a way of paying that debt off. So I think it's not a case of we're going to join South Ribble with Chorley and West Lancs and Preston and it's new councils will be formed and new sets of councillors will make financial decisions on how to run those councils within the finances that they're presented with. Now, some councils in Lancashire have got a better record on that, and I would proudly say, even, you know, under whichever group's been in control, we've got a really good track record to say we run a good, financially sustainable council, and that's always been the case, I think, all the time I've been on this council. But we're going, you know, we are going, and new councils will come, and new members will be elected, and they will have to run a sustainable council within the budgets that they're given. And it's, you know, a brave new world approaches, which we may or may not be a part of. What we've got to make sure is that we get the best solution for our residents and the rest of Lancashire. And I do feel like I'm saying what I've already said, so I'll try and not say it again in the future.
Councillor Walton.
Thank you, Chair. My question was one of that Councillor King said. It's about budget gaps and balancing the budget, and there's already a funding gap of 56.2 million in Lancashire for the next year, rising to nearly 100 million in 27-28, with transition costs, it says here, of 27.2 million and upfront costs of £13.6 million a year. So I was just wondering, you know, and we're borrowing in Lancashire of £2.8 billion debt, but you've answered it to say that we will be a new council, but what will happen during the transition period, you know, for councils like South Ribble while we go through this transition period?
It's an enormous amount of money, but within the context of local government spend, it isn't. I don't think anyone within Lancashire, I'm trying to make eye contact with the Director of Finance, I don't think anyone in Lancashire has anything that is viewed as unsustainable debt. They are generally secured against assets and generally are generating revenue. All councils, and this has been built within the financial modelling, have got to make revenue provisions for repaying debt, and so that is built in to the financial modelling that is used within this proposal and is used within the proposals that are being developed elsewhere in Lancashire. Within that transition period, there was a long debate amongst chief finance officers about trying to find a way recognising that funding of local government nationally and within Lancashire does not mean that we've got a balanced budget position as we move into local government reorganisation, and that kind of position you've alluded to within the report is to demonstrate that those councils will have to set balanced budgets. It's how they go about doing it that can be uncertain right up until the end of those councils in 2028. So South Ribble Council will control all of its finances pretty much until 2028. There will be some spending restrictions put in place in the period from probably around about May, June time 2027. That's to try and make sure that people don't just either spend all of their reserves or to commit to significant ongoing overheads before they cease to exist. But other than that, South Ribble Council will be responsible for its budgets for all that time. We do need to be clear that actually that the significant amount of debt actually sits with the county council. Now that's because the county council has an enormous budget and also enormous responsibilities for capital programmes, particularly related to highways and other infrastructure. There will have to be discussions within Lancashire about how that debt is held in the future. Now that could be that Lancashire as a whole agrees to hold that debt centrally somehow. And I think there's models for how that happens. It could be that it is apportioned out based upon where various assets are. So if a significant amount of debt relates to an asset within an area, it could land with that new council. that needs to happen, but the financial modelling is based upon the revenue provision that needs to be made for those debts. And we do need to be really clear. I don't think anyone thinks that any of the 15 councils in Lancashire have the levels of unsustainable debt that we've seen in some or one or two of the councils elsewhere in the country, which has created a significant complexity that's had to be considered through their LGR proposals.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Councillor Martin and Councillor Green to make their comments together for you to answer, and then after you've answered we will be taking a comfort break.
Thank you, Chair. Carrying your microphones on. I've always had a concern about the survey that's come past. I mean, on rough calculations, it's less than 1% of the population and then if you take into account that 1% of that survey didn't live or work in Lancashire, and there seems to be quite a heavy, from both sides, a heavy usage of that, and that to me that demonstrates that there is a lack of community engagement with the process. So I sort of wonder, should we continue to sort of like lean on these figures, or should we then look to get more figures? And the other part of we've heard is that we need larger councils, because I mean the reference I have is Rutland County Council, 41,000 residents. So South Ribble could have gone on its own. We could have been like Game of Thrones and got rid of the rest of the 7 kingdoms. But I sort of wonder, there's a lot said that sometimes doesn't always level out, because you see other examples where it is. So my only concern is we should be really leaning on these figures initially and look at a new survey, because we were promised a referendum. Apparently that didn't happen. So I was just wondering, what should we then look at doing another one, or looking at doing further research with this, and should we sort of throw away a bit about the amount of numbers we need to create a unitary?
Thanks, Chairman. The report makes a reference to misaligned boundaries, potentially splitting functional economic areas, housing markets and travel to work areas. So I wanted to pick up on this and ask a few questions, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Can I ask you, if you've got a few questions, can we take that after the comfort break, and we'll just deal with Councillor Martin and come back to you.
Well, I'll do this. I'll do the first one first, Keith. Sorry, it might be my fault this, but I've referred to this survey because there is some evidence there which I just thought it's important to share. Because when I recently did it at Pemberton, people didn't realise there'd been a survey, and I guess people in here didn't realise there'd been a survey done. So don't get too hung up on that. My point is, there has been a survey done, a sample, but when the government do their consultation, there's going to be a lot more people coming at it. My point is very simple. Don't get hung up on this. But I know, and you know, and we all know, people don't want change anyway, so we know what's going to happen. My point is to better inform them. What was your second? Sorry, what was the second part? Go on.
I almost think Councillor Martin was suggesting we throw this all out and start all over again, which just terrifies me, to be honest. The government has been quite clear on the time frame. Submissions have to be in by the 28th of this month. If we don't put a submission in, we don't have a voice. And so we've been working on this. And for all, as I said, you know, it's not perfect. And I've said before, there's no correct answer. There's only the best answer. And we still believe that this is the best answer.
I'm going to leave the meeting at this point for 5 minutes. Would you be back in your seats by 7:45? If you wish to make yourself a coffee or a tea, or get some water, or use the toilet, The meeting is resuming. Councillor Flannery. And we're going to ask Councillor Green if he would take up the questions that he had.
Thank you, Chairman. So the report makes reference to misaligned boundaries potentially splitting functional economic areas, housing markets and travel to work zones. So based around that, I wanted to ask some questions, if I may. So as the proposal that we've set out, the 4 unitary proposal, splits the functional economic corridor, how would you ensure that this would not adversely affect economic growth and prosperity for our residents? Would be one question. The second one on the economy, if I may, we were looking at the other models earlier, and the Chief Executive set out the disadvantages of the 2 unitary model. But one thing, unless I missed it, one thing I didn't see was the point that it was cutting across economic corridors to a significant extent. And whilst there may be some advantages to a 2 unitary model, in terms of the economy, travel to work areas, the natural fit of communities, it makes no sense whatsoever to me to have a split along north-south lines. So I just wondered if there were any comments on that, and then if I can come back to talk about housing and planning next.
Yeah, I'll want to take
so I'll start with the second point, sorry. Yes, the 2 unitary, you are right, and I think it is within the proposal somewhere that actually one of the issues that's always raised in Lancashire economic growth documents is that our economic activity works on a north-south basis, but our population lives along that M65 corridor. The 2 unitary model, I've not seen the detailed proposal yet, but I don't see how it overcomes that issue. In relation to the splitting of functional economic areas, being really honest, any model will struggle to get a single functional economic area into one council area. The work that was done through the Lancashire Independent Economic Review a few years ago, which feeds into this and fed into the creation of the Combined County Authority, identifies a series of economic areas. Obviously, from a central Lancashire perspective, you absolutely can see there is a functional economic area around that Preston footprint. The data showed, taking away the South Ribble look and looking through other people's lenses, the data showed in the Independent Economic Review that Chorley, for example's relationship has strengthened with Greater Manchester and Manchester in recent years, so some of that is not as strong. The Fylde Coast functional economic area, the 4 model is the only one that maintains that functional economic area, and that north-south Preston centric, I'm using the wrong term, but that economic corridor that uses the A6, M6 actually does run right from Lancaster down to broadly Chorley and bits of West Lancashire. And so, no, this model does not perfectly align with those. What I would say is that the way of overcoming this that we're putting forward is that strategic authority, that combined authority. None of the options, for example, I think maybe the 2-1, no, actually it doesn't. None of the options put the Samlesbury Enterprise Zone into a single council area. It isn't in a single council area at the moment and is bordered by another 3 council areas within a few hundred metres. And so what we need to do is we need to have a partnership of equals working through a combined authority on those functional economic areas that are contained within Lancashire, and then better outward looking councils to deal with those functional economic areas that actually cross that county boundary into Greater Manchester, into Liverpool, West Yorkshire, which is very weak at the moment, but actually for the economic growth of Pennine Lancashire needs to strengthen, and North Yorkshire and Cumbria. So I think, in answer to your question, I think it's the combined authority, soon to be at some point called a strategic authority, that should provide that vehicle for those boundaries that do cross those new council areas to better work together, and the 4 tries to do the best job it can balancing all those various needs. And I would highlight that it does benefit those other parts of the county area, such as the Foul Coast.
Thank you. Councillor Jane Bell.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to refer to something that James Flannery was saying about consultation. I don't know whether anybody else remembers, but in 1974, all this discussion took place around the Greater Manchester thing. And I was involved in a radio discussion, debate, if you will, that took place in a pub in Saddleworth, which is on the moors just outside Oldham. Saddleworth, anybody knows, it's a lovely little country place, a couple of pubs, has a market, lots of sheep farming. And because it's next to, if you will, Oldham, which was going to be gathered into the Greater Manchester apron, the people in Saddleworth were dead against it. They really did not want to be part of the industry of Oldham and Manchester and Rochdale. They felt that they were just being dragged in. They did object. There was lots of discussion, and I remember them in, if you will, consultation, which is what James is talking about. Bearing in mind, in 1974, we didn't have the same media coverage, etc. But what happened was this absorption went on anyway. The change happened. Mr. Smith at number 2 Acacia Avenue still got up to work, got his bus to work. There were still holes mended in the road. The bins were collected. I don't actually remember the world coming to an end because this catastrophe that people thought was going to happen happened, and it didn't. It just happened. And this, we haven't got any power, from what I'm gathering and from reading this report, any power to change any decision that the government have already made. We can put our 2 pennyworth in, but this is going to happen. And what we have to do, and it's what James is saying, we need to make our residents as aware of as possible and to allay their fears of what changes might come into play. And that's just me being historical and being aware of what happened, I would say it's 50 years ago. And the world didn't come to an end because of that change. So,
Thank you, Councillor Bell.
Yeah, just throw me 2 pennyworth in, really.
Thank you very much. Councillor Green, you had a second question. Are you... Yeah. So I was just looking at what else we've got on the list still to do.
Thank you. My response to the comment that's just been made is I remember the late 1990s when we had a new government that came in and said that local government reorganisation and regional government was going to happen, and we all know what happened to that. It was binned once they consulted with a particular area of the country. Moving on to my question, if I may. So we are currently, as we're all aware, going through the local plan process. And I've repeatedly questioned this council and our partners on the need to build additional houses in Preston and South Hibble to make up for the shortfall that cannot be provided in Chorley. The response has repeatedly been from officers or members that they are within the same housing market, which I did question at the time, I have to say, but that was the professional advice. How then can we now propose a new authority area which clearly splits housing markets, and what impact will that have?
But I think, at the risk of repeating myself, there is no perfect answer to what is a big, complicated picture, and none of these suggestions that are currently being considered answer all the questions that everybody has. None of them. And so I keep coming back to the fact that we think this is the best one. Does it cover the whole of the housing market in Lancashire? No. Does it split some of the markets? It does, clearly. But those markets will continue to exist, and each of the new councils will have to find a way of working with neighbouring councils and the new strategic authority, whether it's a mayoral or a combined authority model, to address how we come up with the housing needs for the whole of the county. And there will be opportunities, I think, with these largest, more strategic councils to do that, probably in a more effective way. Now, it's different to what we've got now. but everything's going to be a little bit different. Some things will be most things will be easier, I suggest. Some things will be made more complicated. But I think certainly in our part of Lancashire, we've shown that we've got a good track record of working with other councils, and there's no reason that the new councils can't continue that ethos and work together to solve some of those problems that cross those boundaries.
The only element I would add is that just picking up on Councillor Tomlinson's point, which is the government within this bill, the English Devolution Bill, and I'm sorry, no, it's not. It's within the infrastructure bill, is emphasising the new spatial development strategies, which. Going to Councillor Green's point is somewhat a return to the past because there used to be regional spatial strategies, but that will pick up a significant amount of that work that actually we've been pushing forward with our partners in Chorley and Preston around looking beyond council boundaries for how do you deliver local planning. We don't know exactly how that's going to work. We don't know exactly what powers will go with it and what responsibilities will go. What we do know is that the anticipation is that that responsibility will be shared between upper tier authorities, so unitary authorities in the new world, or a combined authority, strategic authority. So there will be different mechanisms in play that aren't currently in play in that scenario.
Do we know what stage West Lancs are in terms of a local plan?
No, and I'm not going to commit, but I think it's very, very early. But if you give me a few minutes, I may well be able to find out.
Councillor Bollenberg, we did in our pre-meeting have you down as asking questions relating to this area of planning and the local plan.
Yeah, it was quite a simple high-level question. As we all are aware, we've been through several years of getting the council plan, the local plan in place, and we've passed it this year. How will this affect that? Will we have to go back to the start, or will we begin to almost Frankenstein-like bolt different local plans together?
Without wanting to upset members too much, because I realise this is a very long and involved process of getting a local plan secured, we'll be already into the process of looking towards the future at that point. No, we won't need to start again. So each council would start with the planning policies that are in place when our councils end and the new councils take over. Those new councils would then need to look at it, but they'd need to look at it in any regard because they will need to be refreshing their land supply, their policies, and also responding to other national changes or sub-regional changes such as those spatial development strategies. So assuming, and this is our current anticipation, that our local plan goes through its inspection without significant challenges and that we have a fully adopted local plan within the next year, that would be our local plan for South Ribble, for Chorley, and Preston would have it for their area as well. Bear in mind that actually that will apply in any of the models. Now obviously there is a model that puts Chorley, South Ribble and Preston with one council, but none of the councils currently have a shared local plan with West Lancashire. On a quick Google, by the way, it appears that West Lancs might be ahead of us and have a local plan, but I won't commit to that being entirely true.
Thank you very much. Councillor Green, we were expecting a question from you relating to leisure, public health, environmental health area.
Yes, certainly. I've one more on planning. It's a quick one. Might be complex moving forward.
If it's quick.
It is a quick one. So, developer contributions, in particular community infrastructure levy in section 106, how will we ensure moving forward that there be some kind of equitable distribution of those, and that we don't potentially have a new council that might channel all funds in one area?
The real honest answer is it goes back to the other one. The new council will have responsibility for the area that it serves. And so it will be for that council to make those decisions. What we do know is that local councillors are extremely adept and vociferous in advocating on behalf of their local areas, and I would anticipate that would continue. There will still be elected councillors serving these areas, and you would anticipate that if that new council were to start channeling those funds significantly away from the communities where the development is happening, that challenge will be made. But I don't think there is a technical or legal approach where you can bind, particularly on something like community infrastructure levies, where it is on a council-wide basis.
Can I just interrupt and say the Buckshaw 106 agreement, as I understand it, was that the money should be used within a 2-mile limit of Central Square, Main Square. Are those sort of limits normal on our 106 agreements as they are being proceeded?
So that's where the difference lies between a Section 106 agreement and SIL. Community Infrastructure Levy is a levy that is made for that borough-wide. Now, obviously, members will be aware that there is always a neighbourhood portion, either going to parish town councils or in unparished areas on that behalf. But the strategic bit, but Section 106 is, yes, may well actually be even linked to this play area or this piece of infrastructure. Section 106 agreement might be standard in many respects, but is unique to that planning application and that development. So yes, it can be tied in that way.
Back to you, Councillor.
Thanks, Chairman. I think it was page 25 of the report set out how local government reorganisation may lead to better focusing of investment in parks, libraries, leisure and green spaces, to name a few, to support local needs around health and well-being. Could you give it some examples of what you have in mind when that was written, please?
Can I start from that? As like yourself, Councillor Green, I've served on both Lancashire and here, and the number of times I've had a frustration where we've been trying to do something here and we've been trying to do something here, and the two haven't talked to each other to make it happen in a more coherent way. And sometimes there are very clear examples of where one council's decided this is what we think's best, another council's decided something different. I mean, I was talking to Councillor Howarth today about the Penwitham Master Plan, and we're trying to deliver something there from South Ribble, and we've got these ideas, and as soon as we start delivering stuff, the county council comes and says, oh, well, we were going to do something here in 2 years' time, it's in a document somewhere. We didn't know. They haven't told us, and those are the kind of things that the new model will get rid of, because it will be one council. So if we had an issue in public health, we're trying to promote a healthy lifestyle, which at the moment is the responsibility of the county council, we could say, and to do that, we're going to provide free gym passes in our leisure centres because it's the same council. Whereas at the moment, any suggestion about that would lead to lengthy negotiations between offices on who's covering the cost, who's paying for this. It's public health, so the county council should pay it. No, but it's South Ribble leisure centres, so South Ribble should pay for it. And all those arguments will go, because it will be one council with responsibility for delivering all those local government services. And so I think there are a couple of issues that I've just illustrated where joined up working with one council, with one set of ambition, one budget, one set of aspirations, will be able to work in a much more coherent way than the current system.
Thank you. Yeah, just to add what Matt said, it's just dawned on me there. It's a really important point, that, because what we're all looking at here is a new council, a larger council, with a new economic development plan, with in control of certain priorities which councillors obviously may decide. But coming back to Councillor Green's point before about functional economic areas and travel to work areas, etc., they're all good points. But when you speak to the SME community, which largely make up a lot of what's in our boroughs now, they have two main issues, and they are basically recruitment and space. They don't talk about travel to work distances. As a matter of fact, a third of people who work in Preston travel from outside of Preston. But the point is, we can help them with that. We can say, well, how you recruit, because I know South Ribble in particular have a great team helping businesses recruit. And then space, Will it be a bigger council, a bit more space in terms of what we can offer? So actually, Matt's point there about being in control of a new council with a new set of priorities in terms of both leisure, for example, or health or well-being, or even economic development, it's probably quite an exciting proposition when you sort of get away from the fact that change is coming. There's quite a lot that a bigger council could actually do.
Thank you. I want to move on. Councillor Walton has some questions relating to education.
Thank you, Chair. Well, Lancashire County Council and the two unitaries fund essential high needs services, don't they, at the moment? And one that I'm especially interested in is the SEND pressures with the services of Lancashire County Council, which has reported a £14 million overspend in the high needs. And according to the report, it says that the four unitary model will provide the scale to address SEND pressures more effectively. But how are they going to do this? I haven't found anything to say how are they going to do this. They're going to, obviously, there's going to be a disaggregation of costs in specialist services, for all specialist services, for the viability and ability to deliver safe and legal provision to the most vulnerable of our residents. So how are you going to provide all these services, especially for SEND, when there isn't sufficient provision at the moment to build resilience and provide spaces for all the children and young people that need our SEND report and help?
I think it's really important that this isn't a zero-sum game where suddenly a new council is going to come and solve all the problems that already exist. That's simply not going to happen. And if we advocated for no local government change, then the problems that you've just illustrated will continue to exist. And in fact, if you read the Ofsted report on SEND that was published earlier in the year, it already pointed out that under Lancashire, which is supposedly one council, provision across the county is different and not equal, and you get better services or different services in some parts of the county than you do in the other, and that's under the current system. So will there be change? Yes, there will. Will those pressures still exist? Yes, they will. But these will be larger unitary councils with the resilience and the knowledge of their area to be able to say one size clearly doesn't fit all for Lancashire, because look at what's happening now, it doesn't work, and we'll be able to look at a plan for us. What I would hope is that these new councils will be able to focus much more on their geographical area and the services that are delivered in that area, so that we're not seeing children in Lancashire travelling 2 hours in a minibus to access SEN education, because certainly if I was a member of the new South Lancashire Council, I would want to see services for South Lancashire children delivered in South Lancashire. So straight away there, you would be able to see that if that was, if that was followed through by the four new unitaries, what we want for our children is to deliver services in our area. Actually, you're already seeing some savings. We see some children in Lancashire going outside Lancashire because it's big. It just looks at everybody in its own area and will find options here, there and everywhere. And I just think that a new unitary council focused much more on place will be able to address some of those problems. Will it address them all? No, it won't. Every unitary council, Rochdale's got problems with SEN, Bolton's got problems with SEN. Every unitary council has got, it's an issue that has grown exponentially right across the country, mostly since COVID. But it is a problem that has grown and probably needs government intervention. And I know that the Secretary of State for Education has been really keen on improving services for SEN children. So obviously that's going to feed in. It's a big complex picture that I think a small unitary council that is of a scale to deliver good resilient services is probably better placed than a big two-tier county to, to address the issues that you've raised.
It's just that if there aren't enough send places or provision in the unitary, will there be some provision for extra school places or extra buildings to be built to accommodate all these children in that particular area? I know that children are sent far and wide at the moment, but it's because there aren't sufficient places.
Politics is always about choices. And so that will be choices for the new councils and the new councillors. As I said in my earlier remarks, if I was a new member of the new South Lancashire, I nearly called it South Ribble then, if I was a member of the new South Lancashire Council, I would be keen to see that there are enough places for our SEN children to be cared for and educated within South Lancashire. To be fair, the previous administration at County Hall had started to on a path that was providing more places, that was encouraging mainstream schools to take on SEN units. So more places were being made available. It's just not quick enough to deal with the huge growth that we've seen in numbers in recent years. But that again, you know, that political choice will be a choice for the new councillors to make.
Thank you. I think I've got 3 areas just to briefly explore as we close the meeting. The first is that Lancashire has the highest proportion of grade 1 farming land in the country. I suspect quite a lot of that will be in West Lancs. How do you see, in the past, county councils, for example, have enabled young farmers to get into farming by owning small farms. They've virtually gone. How do you see the new council working with the rural communities and the farming community, bearing in mind in particular that many farmers are in their 50s or 60s, and we are coming to a bit of a problem with farming continuity?
I suppose the reality is we don't know. It would be for those councils to work out what's the best way of delivering for their communities. The point I suppose I would make that links it back into the model is that broadly there's probably 3 out, and it's not that surprising. Lancashire is a rural county that have high levels of farmland. West Lancashire, absolutely right, is true, but actually if you go to any of the western parts of Chorley or South Ribble, they also have considerable amounts of farmland as well. And so that is a council that will need to come up with a strategy for how does it support that industry, that economy. And that's one of the advantages, I suppose, it draws out, one of the advantages of having a 4 unitary model that has a council that has that as a dominant theme, rather than one that then has a city within it as well. The other council that would have a significant rural community would be North Lancashire. Again, it brings together 2 areas of Ribble Valley and the east part of Lancaster City at the moment that has that different type of rural community. And then Wyre and Fylde, which also have significant amounts of farming communities that then can have that focus. So I think probably not answering your question, but saying that I would anticipate that those councils would need to have those strategies in place, because actually they would have that as a significant challenge for that community, not diluted by other areas.
Thank you. Councillor Flannery, you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think from recollection, the last time we developed the economic development strategy for South Ribble, we got a series of events. We brought together people in leisure and tourism, hospitality, construction, manufacturing, etc. And we asked them. So in terms of the scope now and scale and geographical location, if now there is farming and farming communities, you just bring them into that process.
Thank you. Councillor Bonberg.
Before I ask this question, were you going to follow up with rural questions? It is connected not to rural but to industry, and forgive me if I've missed it, but I didn't see anything in the report that covered BAE and the cyber hub, cyber security hub, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are around that.
Yeah, I mean, there is something in the preamble, we talk about the cyber facility that's coming to Samlesbury, so it is in there, and clearly someone like BAE, whether it's at Samlesbury or Wharton, especially with the news that came out in the last 10 days, are going to be significant players in Lancashire for decades. And so it's really important that we work closely with those industries. One, not just in making sure they've got the space to do the work, but in making sure they've got the people to do the work. So the adult skills, the working with education is definitely a theme that will be the new councils will be looking to pursue, and I think it's incomprehensible to think of a model of local government that wouldn't have advanced manufacturing as one of the main themes of its economic development strategy.
Right, second to last, I think. How does this proposal relate to policing?
So clearly the Police and Crime Commissioner has expressed his opinion on local government reorganisation, and it's no surprise that he would prefer to see the 3 unitary option because it sits with the footprint that he's already got. But that's one person, that's one person's view and one organisation's view. You could counter that by saying, well, the NHS footprint's different, so that's another complication. Current local government's different, and at the risk of repeating myself, there is no perfect answer to this question, and many people will have a view, and we have to respect and expect that some people's view will be different to the views of the 6 councils who've decided this is the option we want to pursue.
Does policing lie within the combined authority?
So at the moment, the responsibility for policing lies then with the Police and Crime Commissioner. The government has indicated that, albeit I don't think it's put a timeline to it, that it anticipates that areas that have an elected mayor that is coterminous, that has the boundaries that match with a Police and Crime Commissioner, the elected mayor and the Police and Crime Commissioner role will effectively combine. So that is what you would anticipate will happen in the end across the country and within Lancashire. One of the reasons actually for the government not wanting people to put forward proposals that change county boundaries is that significantly more challenging if you're changing police areas as well as local government footprints at the same time. And so none of the proposals being put forward challenge the overall boundary of the constabulary. Obviously there is then the command units that constabulary uses at the moment, which we need to change depending on which boundary is selected by the government.
Thank you. And the last question, which you might think is appropriate for this committee, is where do you see scrutiny lying in this process as we move towards a unitary authority?
So that depends on what the question is. Where do you see scrutiny as we move towards? Then clearly the scrutiny committees of whichever councils the government decides are going to join together will have, I think, a significant role to play. And it may well be that, for instance, and hypothetically, if the government decides South Ribble, Chorley, West Lancs is going to be one council, it may well be that the 3 scrutiny chairs of those councils want to do some joint work as the plans are developed. And then, the Local Government Act is quite clear about the role of scrutiny in any new council, that there will be scrutiny committees that work in much the same way as scrutiny committees already work in all councils, apart from those that still use the committee structure. So I suppose there's 2 different answers to that, depending on how you decide to take the question. But I think it could be a really interesting time for scrutiny, actually. It could be a really interesting time.
I will just add that actually we don't know until we know what the answer is, because actually it depends on how you cluster. In any organisation that we're doing will involve, for us, the county council and relevant district councils. We've all got slightly differing setups when it comes to scrutiny, and as we've discussed this evening, West Lancashire currently use a committee system, which means it is different again. But I would anticipate that there is a significant amount of work that will be happening to prepare for reorganisation. There almost certainly will be some sort of joint committee established, not definitely, but almost certainly. And I would anticipate you would expect there would be a joint scrutiny established to run alongside that, because that's how you can do that policy development and development of ideas and suggestions around what the new shape might be, for then that new shadow authority and ultimately the new council to be able to take into consideration.
Thank you. I think that's the end. Oh, Councillor Green.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I've got lots more questions, but I'll ask one more about early intervention, if I may. So I read in the report, I was pleased because it's something that I'm really keen on, but it states that at our proposed scale and by investing in prevention and early intervention, particularly in social care, we will ensure that services are safe, effective and more accessible. And obviously this will lead to long-term costs reducing whilst hopefully improving outcomes for residents, which is what we're all here to achieve at the end of the day. But the next question is, how do we actually achieve that? And where's the additional funding? And what assurances do we have that we would actually see those improvements moving forward?
So there isn't necessarily additional funding, it's how you use the funding that you have available to you differently. I think we've probably already touched upon it in some of the other responses to the questions that have been posed. At the moment, two-tier working means that a lot of services that are probably fundamentally around the wider determinants of health, around prevention and early intervention, sit with district councils. And I would suggest that South Ribble Borough Council has quite a long track record in making best use of its core services to try and support our residents. More recent examples would include things like extra care and the development of a social prescribing service, but actually fundamentally a well-functioning homelessness service is maybe a reactive service in many respects for us, but a well-functioning service is quite a good preventative service for the rest of public services. Our argument in relation to the 4 model compared to other models is that gives you the greatest possible approach to understanding the local area so you can tailor your services. But equally, whilst it's still emerging, the NHS is moving, and I realise that they have said this for a while, but is moving to a neighbourhood model. And so what I would anticipate doing is that you would be looking at the services that are delivered and paid for through general practice, through primary care, alongside the services that currently sit within district council footprint, alongside services such as public health. Instead of working in silos where different outcomes are anticipated and different approaches are taken, you would unify that more. So in recalling the answer given by the leader, where you look at, well, what's the impact of leisure centres on public health? That sits within one organisation, and it's how you move that funding around differently to have a bigger effect. And I suppose fundamentally our arguments are more optimistic and positive arguments around reorganisation is it is disruptive, and that can be a risk that you need to manage, but it can also be an opportunity. It could be an opportunity to say, well, this is the pot of money available to us. A significant proportion needs to go in delivering statutory and reactive services, but how do we better use this pot of money that at the moment perhaps isn't recognising the impact it can have on the wider system in things like housing, public protection, environmental health, licensing, to better support some of those demand-led services in health and social care. So there is no straightforward answer, and it's certainly not something that on the 2nd of April 2028 you'd say, right, we're done now, and look at all the savings that are now flowing in. It would be something that you would anticipate would have to be a cultural shift by that new unitary council to deliver over a very long period of time, because the reality is you are not going to be doing the prevention for people who are already either in the system or on the verge of the system. You are doing the prevention for people who are probably 10 years away from it. So no new money, it's how you use it differently.
Thank you.
And I think, Chairman, just commenting on that, is if we do have a new council, I think it's the opportunity to see that genuine cultural shift right from the beginning. that we've all talked about for many years and not been able to deliver. That would be present the opportunity.
Which sounds like a good impetus for many of us who want that to ensure that we get elected. I think we're now at the stage where we will have to move to our proposals to go to the Cabinet. So if people who are not members of the committee wish to remove themselves, you're more than welcome to stay if you want while we do it, but you don't have to stay. And I realise you've been here for
Any members not on committee would like to ask.
Sorry, my apologies. Are there any members not on committee who've got questions that they're burning to ask? Councillor Smith.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Unlike the committee, unfortunately, I have not been able to read all the papers because I only got them this evening, so that puts a bit of a serious disadvantage. However, I did read the initial papers that came out with the agenda for the meeting itself. The meeting itself this evening, a scrutiny meeting, and that's what it's supposed to be, and that's what it is. Obviously, members find it, it's more of a question and answers, which I found quite helpful, to be quite honest, but it's more a question and answers session rather than an actual scrutiny meeting where something's been actually scrutinised. So I suppose I look forward to the recommendations of the scrutiny committee after you've managed to put them all together, and look forward to seeing what those are. One recommendation that the scrutiny committee might care to look at would be, and there's a significant interest and support in this council for, and we'll call it the status quo, but not quite the status quo, an enhanced two-tier system. And the leader of the council expressed support, I suppose, for that, in the sense that they're not looking for change. So maybe one of the recommendations that the scrutiny committee might make to Cabinet, and it's Cabinet that will make the decision, and ultimately the government that will make the decision, that this council is happy with this two-tier system or an enhanced two-tier system, and maybe that could go and be part of the recommendation that actually would go to the Cabinet to ruminate on and make a decision on, indeed it would reflect that's what the council might want to government without massive changes coming on, bearing in mind that it's the government that will make the choices for us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that wasn't a question that needs answering, and so we will move to the section where we formulate our responses to this report and allow any of you who are not on the committee, should you wish, to leave. I thought there might be a rush at this point. Do you have any? Yeah. I'm going to ask Darren Cranshaw to outline in his normal inimitable way the possible outcomes that we might wish to make to our proposals to Cabinet.
Thank you, Chair. Some of the themes from the discussion tonight that the committee might like to consider as recommendations. The Joint Committee thanks the Leader, Lead Member and Chief Executive for attending and answering questions. The Joint Committee commends the significant work involved in preparing the submission in a short period of time. The Joint Committee asks that the section on neighbourhood area committees be reviewed to see if this could be strengthened further around greater localism and community engagement. The Joint Committee suggests further clarity being provided on the status of the references to having an elected mayor. The Joint Committee welcomes the offer from the lead member to engage more with local communities on local government reorganisation moving forward. And finally, the Joint Committee is grateful for the commitment to continue to involve scrutiny on local government reorganisation moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
Can I ask that we might add something along the lines of the joint committee asks the Cabinet to look at the balance in the report between 3 and 4 unitaries and to strengthen the model towards the 4th one in places where it seems that certainly in places the balance in the report at the moment might make a case for 3 rather than 4, if that makes sense. Any, Councillor Walton?
Thank you, Chair. So the government has set out a timetable for this procedure and production, and if the goal of reorganisation is better services, stronger governance and greater efficiencies, why haven't we considered any other options rather than the 3 and the 4 which was brought to council, which we voted on, and why can't we consider perhaps a 2-tier enhanced model of local government with you know, the district councils delivering more of the services that are best placed to provide, and the county council or the combined authority delivering strategic services like the adult social care? Why haven't we thought about considering those and only considered the ones that are brought before us tonight? I know that's what we were asked to consider, but I haven't heard anything tonight to convince me that this is the right way forward.
My response to that, I think, would have to be that the government doesn't give us that amount of leeway in its offer to us. So we have to work within what central government is offering to us. Councillor Ashton.
Yes, I can't think how to word it, so over to Darren, assuming other people agree. And it was just something around this whole idea of actually trying to engage is perhaps too strong a word, but the whole idea of how this plays out in terms of the public, and what we can do to help the public actually understand what's going to happen. So.
Yeah, Councillor King.
Yeah, I think there's been a number of comments from a number of members on the committee and off the committee about the mandate to do with this and having a bit of a conversation, whether that be via referendums, whether that be anything else, that hasn't formed part of the recommendations, and I do think it should be, because there isn't a mandate here, and I think we've at least discussed a general consensus that there needs to be some greater engagement that goes on.
Councillor Green.
Thanks, Chairman. Thank you to Darren for summarising those recommendations. I'd like clarification because I was trying to make notes and I wasn't quite sure what you said with regard to the reference to the mayoralty moving forward. So clarification on that, please, and then I've got some other comments as well.
Okay, so the joint committee suggests further clarity being provided on the status of the references to having an elected mayor.
Thank you. I think we should strengthen that. I think we should make the point that there is absolutely no mandate for an elected mayor, and everything should be caveated that there is further consultation before we take any decision regarding that. And if that's going to come from the Lancashire Combined County Authority, I appreciate that, which was the response that was given before. Presumably they would have to carry out consultation, as was carried out extensively before the CCA was actually established. But I think that public consultation absolutely is intrinsic in this for me, and it's not something that we should be given the assumption that we're working towards that. Because as I said earlier, there are pros, there are cons, and I can see both sides of it in some ways, but with no mandate. I take on board the point that Councillor King said regarding mandates in general. There simply isn't one. There's no manifesto from anybody, either locally or nationally, to support this. What consultation there has been, and we talked more than expected about the consultation this evening, but what that is telling us is nearly 2/3 of the people want to maintain the status quo. That's the only consultation we've got. There's nothing to support the change, and I don't think we should be moving ahead before we do so. I think the point I made before about what appeared to be the universal view of the council as a whole, that we would prefer to keep South Ribble, should be front and centre on the basis of our submission when we are making a submission. I took on board, I think, the point Councillor Tomlinson said, well, this is a submission on behalf of 6 councils. Yes, it is, but equally we are here as South Ribble councillors, and from our perspective we could make our own submission setting out front and clear that our preferred position as a council is to maintain the status quo, whether that's in an enhanced format, as Councillor Walton rightly makes out, or whether it's staying as we are. That's the preferred position. But if the government wishes to push this on us and impose it on us, well, then this may be our preferred option as a council. And the last concern that I've got is reading the reports, and I'll accept that it's really difficult with the lateness that we got these reports, and we've gone over these grounds, but to fully appreciate over 200 pages in one working day is extremely difficult for us, as we've commented. But from what I have read and what we've heard this evening, I am not convinced that the proposal before us offers us the financial resilience, the workforce capability, the structural scale to safeguard the quality of services moving forward and to ensure long-term sustainability. I'm not fully convinced by it, and on that basis I can't support the proposal this evening. Thank you.
Can I just... I'm trying to work out what proposal it is that you're not supporting.
The proposal that's before us as the council's preferred option.
The proposals we've got are not voting on whether this is the way forward. That is a matter for the Cabinet, not for this committee. This committee is a scrutiny committee looking at a proposal and making recommendations to the Cabinet, who make the decision. So on both that matter, in terms of this is not a proposal that we're voting on, it is a matter that we're scrutinising, which is not the same thing. Secondly, in terms of the mandate questions that were made, again, that is not a matter for this body. This is a scrutiny committee. It is a matter for the Cabinet to make that conclusion should they wish to. All we could do, if we wish to do, was, and I would suggest this might be one way forward on this, is that this scrutiny committee recommends that the Cabinet explore and support further consultation within our communities on this matter. I think that's probably as far as we can go within the remit of this committee. Can I just go to the Chief Executive on that? Or to the...
Just if it's helpful, and I have said publicly that this is not something we seek or have campaigned for, but I have said, you know, we have to deal with the world that we are in, and the government have made it quite clear this is what's happening. And if people don't like this submission that we want to put forward, they need to say what they do want, and they have to say it by the 28th of November. And we've known that for nearly a year. So this is the submission that will be going for Cabinet to debate on Thursday, and we welcome any suggestions from the Scrutiny Committee about how this could be tweaked, changed, nuanced, finessed, whatever you want to describe it. But I'm quite clear as the leader, we will not be going to Cabinet on Thursday and saying we don't want this, so we're not going to support this submission. That's simply not going to happen. Oh, I've got cramp. Excuse me. Oh, so you know that's the reality. That's the world that we are operating in. And I will say at Cabinet, and I'm prepared to, you know, put it in writing, this is not something that we've campaigned for. This is not something we've sought, but the government have been clear. And when it comes to you haven't got a mandate, they got elected with a massive majority for a 5-year term, and they are the government, and they were being quite clear that this is the journey that local government in England is on, and we are a part of that journey. And I think it would be an abrogation of our responsibilities to say we don't like it, so we're not going to play. It's happening. We need to say what we think is the best option for the residents of South Ribble and for wider Lancashire. And that's what this journey has been on for us all. And now that we've come to the sharp end, we need to say which model of local government reorganisation we prefer. And that's what this whole process has been about. And I know some people don't like it, and I know some people wish it wasn't happening, but it is.
Can I need to say quite clearly, the remit of this committee is to scrutinise the proposal in front of us. It is not to make decisions on behalf of the whole council as to whether we go ahead with whether we want to go ahead with local government or not. It is our remit to scrutinise the proposal that is in front of us. Councillor Howard. Yeah, thank you very much. Would there be a seconder on that? Thank you very much. Can you reread those proposals, please?
Thank you, Chair. The recommendations, draft recommendations for the committee to consider are the Joint Committee thanks Leader, Lead Member and Chief Executive for attending and answering questions. The Joint Committee commends the significant work involved in preparing the submission in a short period of time. The Joint Committee asks that the section on neighbourhood area committees be reviewed to see if they can be strengthened around greater localism and community involvement. The Joint Committee suggests further clarity be provided on the status of the references to having an elected mayor. The Joint Committee welcomes the offer from the lead member to engage with local communities on local government reorganisation in the future. The Joint Committee is grateful for the commitment to continue to involve scrutiny with local government reorganisation moving forward. The Joint Committee asks that the Cabinet look at the balance between a 3 and 4 unitary option to strengthen and have a clear differentiation between the two options. The Joint Committee develop a communications plan to help the public understand and make the most of local government reorganisation. And finally, the Joint Committee asks that the further exploration be carried out on how we can consult more with residents as the proposals are put forward and implemented. Thank you, Chair.
I'm very grateful for you, Mr. Crenshaw, for the way in which you can put matters so succinctly in summing up debate. We are not debating or voting on whether this proposal whether we should be voting on this proposal. We are simply voting on these responses of the Scrutiny Committee to the proposal that is in front of us. Could those in favour please show?
Can I move an amendment, please?
Yes.
Thank you. I would accept what has been said, but my amendment would be setting out clearly the position that we support the status quo as the preferred option. And then if the government imposes this on us, as they intend to do, as we currently see, then this is our preferred option. I'm effectively mirroring the leader's words, both this evening and at Council in July. So I'm trying to be helpful here, and I just think that will be the better option to submit to government.
Can I take some advice from our, do we have a monitoring officer? Sorry. As to whether this amendment actually is within the remit of the committee. Is there a seconder for that? Those in favour of the amendment, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those against, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That falls. Thank you very much. We therefore vote for the substantive motion, which is the resolutions as put forward to us by Mr Cranshaw. Those in favour, please show. That is carried. Thank you very much for your time, and particularly for the work that's gone in preparing for this meeting.